I worked for Alaska Fish and Game for 12 years. In September 1984, experienced hunters started dying in the national park.
Before we get started, if you're into real stories from wildlife officers who've seen things in the wilderness that don't make sense, the incidents that never make it into official reports, and the cases that get classified and buried, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like if you want more content from Alaska's backcountry. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Comment below. Now, what I'm about to tell you started in September 1994 in Denali National Park, and it's the reason I transferred out of Alaska after 12 years with Fish and Game. Let's get into it. My name is James Kowalski. Everyone calls me Jim. And in 1994, I was a wildlife officer with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. I'd been working the Denali region for 12 years, knew the park better than most rangers, knew the animals, knew the terrain, knew how to survive in 6 million acres of wilderness that could kill you a dozen different ways. I'd seen bear attacks, hypothermia cases, lost hikers, hunting accidents, all the standard tragedies that happen when humans underestimate Alaska. But in all those 12 years, I'd never seen anything like what started happening in September 1994. The hunting season had just opened. Moose, caribou, Dall sheep, all legal game in the areas surrounding Denali National Park. We get hundreds of hunters every year, mostly experienced guys from the lower 48 or locals who've been hunting Alaska for decades. Serious hunters. People who know what they're doing. Which is why when experienced hunters start dying, you pay attention. The first body was found on September 15th by a group of hikers near the Tupilaq River, about 30 miles from the park entrance. Male, mid-40s, full hunting gear, expensive rifle. He'd been reported missing 3 days earlier when he didn't return from a solo hunt. The state troopers called me in because it was my territory, and because the scene was unusual enough that they wanted a wildlife officer's opinion. I hiked out to the location with Trooper Sarah Chen, who'd been first responder. The body was in a clearing about 2 miles from where the hunter's truck had been parked. "Tell me what you see," Sarah said when we got there. I looked at the scene. The hunter, his name was Michael Patterson from Oregon, was lying in the center of a perfect circle. Around him, arranged in a radius of about 15 feet, were his belongings. Backpack, water bottles, camping gear, all placed at exact intervals around the perimeter. And his rifle. A Remington 700, high-powered hunting rifle, positioned pointing outward from the circle. The bolt was open. The magazine was empty. "He fired all his rounds," I said, examining the rifle. 5 shots, standard magazine. "We found the brass casings," Sarah said. "All 5, spread around the circle. He was shooting outward, away from his position." I looked at the ground. The hunter had clearly been here for hours, maybe longer. There were boot prints in the soft earth, showing he'd paced around the circle repeatedly, but he hadn't left the circle. The prints all stayed within the perimeter. "Cause of death?" I asked. "Hypothermia," Sarah said. Medical examiner confirmed it. No injuries, no signs of violence. He just froze to death. I looked at the thermometer on my pack. It was 58 degrees. Mid-September in Alaska. The weather was cool, but not cold. Certainly not cold enough to kill a healthy man in full hunting gear in a matter of hours. "That's impossible," I said. "You don't freeze to death in this temperature, not this fast." "I know," Sarah said. "That's why we called you. We're hoping you can explain what happened here." I examined the rest of the scene. No animal tracks except the hunter's own boot prints. No signs of a bear or wolf attack. No evidence that anything had threatened him. But the hunter had clearly felt threatened. He'd arranged his gear in a defensive circle. He'd fired all 5 rounds from his rifle. He'd stayed in that circle until hypothermia killed him, defending against something. But what? I need to check something, I said. I walked around the outside of the circle, looking at the trees, the ground, anything that might show what the hunter had been shooting at. Found them about 20 yards out, 5 bullet impacts, 4 in trees, 1 in the ground. I dug out one of the bullets from a spruce trunk. Standard hunting round, .30-06. Nothing unusual about the ammunition. But the pattern of the shots was strange. They weren't grouped together like you'd shoot at an animal. They were spread out in a wide arc, like he was shooting at multiple targets, or at something that was moving in a circle around him. "Sarah," I called out. "Did Patterson have any survival training, military background?" According to his wife, he was ex-Army, Sarah said. Served in the First Gulf War. Experienced outdoorsman. Been hunting Alaska for 15 years. A trained soldier. An experienced hunter. Someone who knew how to survive, how to fight, how to stay calm under pressure. And he'd died of hypothermia in 58-degree weather after firing his rifle at something that left no tracks. "We need to check if there are other cases," I said. "Other hunters who died under similar circumstances." "Why do you think there are others?" Sarah asked. "Because experienced hunters don't do this," I said, gesturing at the circle. "They don't form defensive positions against nothing. They don't fire their weapons at empty air. They don't freeze to death in mild weather. This," I paused, trying to find the right words, "this is behavior you only see when someone is being hunted. When they know something is out there, circling them, waiting." Over the next week, I searched through Alaska Fish and Game records going back 10 years, looking for any similar cases. Hunters found dead under unusual circumstances. Unexplained hypothermia, defensive positioning, fired weapons with no apparent target. Found 6 cases, 1988. Hunter found dead near Mount McKinley, arranged in a circle. Died of hypothermia in September weather. Rifle empty, 1989. 2 hunters found dead near Savage River, arranged in adjacent circles. Both died of hypothermia, both rifles empty. 1991. Hunter found dead near Sable Pass, arranged in a circle. Died of hypothermia. Rifle empty. 1992. Hunter found dead near Sanctuary River, arranged in a circle. Died of hypothermia, rifle empty. 1993. 3 hunters found dead near Igloo Creek, arranged in connected circles. All died of hypothermia. All rifles empty. Total, 8 hunters dead under identical circumstances over 6 years. All experienced. All armed, all found in defensive circles. All killed by hypothermia in weather that shouldn't cause hypothermia. And all of them during hunting season September through October. Every single year. I brought my findings to my supervisor, Regional Director William Morrison. Laid out all the case files, all the photos, all the evidence of a clear pattern. Morrison looked at the files for a long time. Then he looked at me. "Jim, what are you suggesting? That something is hunting our hunters?" "I'm suggesting we have a pattern that needs investigation," I said. 8 deaths in 6 years, all during hunting season, all with identical circumstances. That's not coincidence. It could be environmental, Morrison said. Something about Denali's microclimate that causes sudden temperature drops. Or maybe these hunters all had underlying health conditions that made them susceptible to hypothermia. Ex-military, experienced outdoorsmen, all with expensive gear, I said. And they all fired their weapons before dying. At something. What were they shooting at? Morrison closed the files. Without evidence of what they were shooting at, we can't determine anything. Maybe they were panicking. Maybe they saw shadows and thought they were being attacked. Maybe hypothermia was already setting in and they were hallucinating. There are a dozen explanations that don't involve something hunting hunters. What about the circles? I asked. The defensive formations? Survival instinct, Morrison said. When you're disoriented, when you're hypothermic, you try to protect yourself. You create a perimeter. You fire your weapon to scare off predators. It's textbook panic response. He wasn't going to listen. Wasn't going to acknowledge the pattern. And I understood why. Officially investigating this would require admitting that something in Denali National Park was killing hunters that would devastate the hunting economy, cost the state millions in lost revenue, create panic. Better to call it environmental factors and move on. What do you want me to do? I asked. Continue your normal patrols, Morrison said. Keep an eye on hunting activity. Document any unusual incidents. But Jim, don't go looking for monsters. They don't exist. And even if they did, our job is to manage wildlife, not chase ghost stories. 2 weeks later, on September 28th, we found another body. This time it was a pair of hunters, father and son from Colorado, both experienced, both well-equipped. They'd gone out together 4 days earlier for a caribou hunt. When they didn't return, their family reported them missing. Search and rescue found them 3 miles north of the Tupilaq River. I flew out in a helicopter with the SAR team. Saw the scene from the air before we landed. 2 circles adjacent, perfectly formed, with the hunters' bodies in the centers and their gear arranged in precise defensive perimeters. We landed, and I approached the scene on foot. The father, Robert Sullivan, age 52, was in the western circle. The son, David Sullivan, age 27, was in the eastern circle. Their circles were touching, overlapping slightly where they'd been back to back. Both rifles were empty. I counted the brass casings. Robert had fired 8 rounds. David had fired 7. 15 shots between them. Not at animals, not at each other, at something else. I examined the ground between the circles. There were boot prints showing that at some point the 2 men had been facing outward, backs together, covering different directions. A tactical formation, military-style defensive positioning. What the hell happened here? One of the SAR team members asked. I didn't answer. I was looking at something I'd found in the grass between the circles' claw marks. Deep gouges in the earth. 4 parallel scratches, each about 3 inches apart, carved into the soil. But the scratches were strange. They didn't look like bare claws. Too narrow, too precise. They didn't look like wolf claws. Too deep, too large. They looked like something else. Something I didn't recognize. I took photos, took soil samples, took measurements. And then I noticed something even stranger. The temperature. It was 62 degrees according to my thermometer. Warm for late September. But inside the circles, inside the perimeter where the bodies lay, I could see my breath. Could see frost on the grass. Could feel cold radiating from the center of each circle like they were refrigerators. I stepped into Robert Sullivan's circle. The temperature dropped instantly. Had to be 30 degrees colder inside the circle than outside. My breath came out in visible clouds. My fingers started to numb. I stepped back out. The temperature normalized immediately. Did you feel that? I asked the SAR team. They looked at me confused. Feel what? The cold inside the circles. One of the SAR members stepped into David Sullivan's circle, stood there for a moment, stepped back out. Feels the same to me. Maybe slightly cooler, but nothing dramatic. But I could see the frost. Could see the condensation on the grass inside the circles, could feel the cold radiating from where the bodies lay. Something had frozen these men to death. Something localized, targeted, deliberate. something that only affected the space inside their defensive circles. I spent the next 3 days investigating the Sullivan case. Interviewed the family, checked the hunters' medical history, examined their equipment, found nothing unusual. 2 healthy men with proper gear who should have survived easily. But they hadn't survived. They died of hypothermia in warm weather after firing 15 rounds at something that left only claw marks in the ground. On October 2nd, I got a call from Sarah Chen, the state trooper who'd worked the Patterson case with me. "Jim, we've got another one," she said. "Hunter found dead near Sanctuary River. Same pattern, circle formation, empty rifle, hypothermia. You need to see this." I drove out to the scene. Arrived at dusk. The hunter was a woman this time. Jennifer Reeves, age 38, from Montana, experienced hunter, military background, all the right equipment. Found in a perfect circle, rifle empty, dead from hypothermia. But this time, there was something new scratched into the ground inside the circle. Written in what looked like Jennifer's own handwriting was a message. "It knows what I am. It's teaching me. Can't stop counting 93, 92, 91. Numbers, counting down. Like she'd been keeping track of something during her final hours. She was alive for a while, Sarah said. Medical examiner thinks she survived in this circle for at least 12 hours before hypothermia killed her, and she spent that time writing this. I looked at the numbers. Counting down from what? What was at 100? "We don't know," Sarah said. "But Jim, there's something else you need to see." She led me to the edge of the clearing, pointed at a tree about 30 yards from the circle. Carved into the bark, deep enough to last for years, was a symbol. A circle with radiating lines like a sun or a compass rose, and below it, words in a language I didn't recognize. "Is this Athabascan?" I asked. "Inuit?" "We don't know," Sarah said. "We're going to have someone from the university look at it. But Jim, I think this has been here a long time. Look at the weathering. This carving is old, maybe decades old." I took photos of the carving, of the symbol, of Jennifer's countdown, of everything, because I was starting to understand. This wasn't new. This had been happening for a long time, decades, maybe longer. And someone, some culture, some people who knew this land before we did, had left warnings we hadn't seen, warnings we hadn't understood, until now. The University of Alaska Linguistics Department confirmed what I'd suspected. The carving was in Koyukon Athabascan, one of the indigenous languages of interior Alaska. The translation came back 3 days later. "Here, the hunter becomes the hunted. Here, the Tupilaq teaches. Do not hunt without respect, or it will show you what being prey means." Tupilaq, I'd heard the word before, vaguely, in connection with Inuit and Athabascan folklore. But I didn't know what it meant. I needed to talk to someone who did. Through contacts at Fish and Game, I got connected with an elder named Thomas Nikolai from the village of Minto, about 60 miles northeast of Denali. He was 84 years old, a traditional knowledge keeper for the Koyukon Athabascan people. His grandson, Joseph, agreed to drive me out to meet him. We sat in Thomas's living room, a modest house filled with hunting trophies, traditional tools, and photographs spanning decades. Thomas made us tea and sat across from me, studying my face with eyes that seemed to see more than I was comfortable showing. "You've come about the circles," he said. "Not a question, a statement." "How did you know?" I asked. "Because hunters have been dying in circles near Denali for as long as I can remember," Thomas said. "My grandfather told me stories about it. His grandfather told him stories about it. This has been happening for hundreds of years, maybe longer." "What's causing it?" I asked. The university translated a carving, mentioned something called a Tupilaq. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Tupilaq, he said. It's an old word, means made thing, or created thing. In the old stories, a Tupilaq is a creature made from animal parts, bone, sinew, teeth, claws, animated by the spirit of revenge, when someone hunts without respect, when someone kills for sport instead of need, when someone takes more than they give back. The land creates a Tupilaq to teach them what it means to be hunted. You're saying the land itself creates these things? I asked. Some kind of supernatural creature? Not supernatural, Thomas corrected. Natural. But from a nature we don't understand anymore. The old ways recognize that animals have spirits, that the land has memory, that actions have consequences beyond what we can see. When you hunt with respect, take only what you need, honor the animal, give thanks for the sacrifice, you maintain balance. But when you hunt without respect, the land corrects the imbalance. By killing the hunter, I said. By teaching the hunter, Thomas said. The Tupilaq doesn't just kill. It makes you understand what the animal felt. The fear, the helplessness, the knowledge that something is stalking you, that you're prey, that you have no escape. The circles. That's not the hunters creating a defense. That's the Tupilaq forcing them to experience being surrounded, being hunted, being cornered. And the cold, hypothermia, isn't the cause of death. It's the result of understanding. When you truly comprehend what it means to die as prey, your body gives up, shuts down, freezes from the inside out. I thought about Michael Patterson, about the Sullivans, about Jennifer Reeves, all experienced hunters, all people who should have survived. But they died anyway, frozen in defensive circles, rifles empty, after shooting at something that left no visible tracks. How do you stop it? I asked. How do you protect hunters from this? You don't, Thomas said. You can't. The Tupilaq exists because it needs to exist. Because without it, humans would hunt without consequence, would take without giving, would destroy the balance. The Tupilaq is how the land protects itself. So we just let it kill people? I asked. We don't warn them. Don't try to prevent it. We do warn them, Thomas said. The carvings, the stories, the traditions about hunting with respect. We've been warning for generations, but people don't listen. They think the stories are just folklore. They think they know better. They come up from the lower 48 with expensive gear and high-powered rifles, and they hunt for trophies, for sport, for bragging rights. They don't respect the animal. They don't understand what hunting really means. And so the Tupilaq teaches them. What about local hunters? I asked. Do they die too? Sometimes, Thomas admitted, if they forget the old ways, if they hunt without respect. The Tupilaq doesn't discriminate based on where you're from. It only responds to how you hunt. But there must be a way to stop it, I said, some way to protect people who don't know about this, who don't understand the old ways. Thomas looked at me with something like pity. You can't protect people from the consequences of their own disrespect. That's not how the world works. The Tupilaq will continue teaching until people learn to listen. I left Thomas's house with more questions than answers. Drove back to Denali thinking about what he'd said. About hunting with respect. About consequences. About a creature made by the land to teach lessons to those who wouldn't learn any other way. It sounded like folklore, like superstition, like something that couldn't possibly be real. But the bodies were real. The circles were real. The hypothermia was real. And I'd felt that cold inside the circles, had seen the frost where there shouldn't be frost, had witnessed something that didn't fit into the natural explanations I'd been trained to accept. On October 8th, 2 more hunters died, both in circles, both from hypothermia, both with empty rifles. On October 12th, another hunter. Same pattern. On October 15th, 3 more hunters found together in connected circles like the Sullivans, all dead from hypothermia. The count was up to 14 hunters dead in a single season, the worst hunting season in Alaska history. The state was starting to panic. Hunting groups were demanding answers. Tourism was suffering. Fish and Game was under pressure to explain what was happening and how to stop it. Director Morrison called a meeting of all wildlife officers in the region. Wanted to coordinate a response. Wanted to figure out how to keep hunters safe. I sat in that meeting and listened to theories, environmental factors. Viral infection causing rapid hypothermia. Psychological phenomenon causing mass panic. Equipment failure. Everything except the truth. Finally, I stood up. "It's a Tupilaq," I said. The room went silent. Everyone stared at me. "It's a creature from Athabascan folklore," I continued. "Created by the land to punish hunters who don't show respect. It stalks them, circles them, forces them into defensive positions, and teaches them what it feels like to be prey. That's why they're dying in circles. That's why they're freezing to death in warm weather. That's why their rifles are empty. They're being hunted by something that's making them understand what the animals they hunt experience." Morrison's face went red. "Kowalski, that's enough. We're looking for scientific explanations, not ghost stories." "I've talked to the Koyukon elders," I said. "I've researched the history. This has been happening for hundreds of years. There are warnings carved into trees all over Denali. The indigenous people knew about this. They knew that hunting without respect has consequences." "So, what are you suggesting?" another officer asked. "That we tell hunters they need to say a prayer before shooting? That we need to perform rituals to appease the nature spirits? This is the 1990s, Kowalski, not the Stone Age. I'm suggesting we need to acknowledge that there are things we don't understand," I said, "and that maybe, just maybe, the old ways of understanding the world had some truth to them." Morrison stood up. "This meeting is over. Kowalski, I want to see you in my office now." In Morrison's office, he didn't yell. He didn't get angry. He just looked tired. "Jim, I know this is hard," he said. "Seeing people die, not being able to protect them, it's the worst part of this job. But you can't lose your grip on reality. You can't start believing in supernatural creatures just because you don't have an explanation for what's happening." "What if the explanation is supernatural?" I asked. "What if there are things in Alaska that we don't understand? Things that existed here long before we arrived?" "Then we'd find evidence," Morrison said. "Physical evidence, tracks, scat, hair samples, something. But we haven't found anything. Just dead hunters in circles with no indication of what killed them except hypothermia. That's a medical phenomenon, not a supernatural one." "I felt the cold inside those circles," I said. "It was real. It was localized. It was targeted. That's not a medical phenomenon. That's something else." Morrison sighed. "I'm suspending you for 2 weeks. Paid leave. I want you to go home, rest, get your head straight. When you come back, we'll talk about whether you can continue working in this region. But for now, you're off the case, understood?" I understood. He was benching me because I was seeing the truth. Because I was acknowledging what everyone else refused to acknowledge. "Understood," I said, but I had no intention of resting. I had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to figure out how to stop this. 2 weeks to find a way to protect hunters from something that had been killing them for centuries. 2 weeks to hunt the Tupilaq. I spent the first 3 days of my suspension researching everything I could find about Tupilaqs. Read anthropology papers, folklore collections, indigenous oral histories learned that the concept existed across multiple Arctic cultures: Inuit, Yupik, Athabascan. The details varied, but the core idea was consistent. A creature made from animal parts, animated by spiritual force, created to exact revenge or teach lesson. In most traditions, Tupilaqs were created by shamans, assembled from bones and sinew, given life through ritual, sent out to punish specific targets. But in some versions, particularly in inland Athabascan stories, Tupilaqs weren't created by humans. They were created by the land itself. Spontaneous manifestations of ecological imbalance. Nature's immune response to human excess. That fit what was happening in Denali. The hunters weren't being targeted by human shamans. They were being targeted by something the land created in response to hunting without respect. But how do you stop something like that? How do you fight a creature that's made by nature to correct imbalances? The answer was in Thomas Nicolai's words. You can't protect people from the consequences of their own disrespect. But maybe I could face those consequences myself. Maybe I could draw the Tupilaq to me. And maybe, if I approached it the right way, with respect, with understanding, with acknowledgement of what it was trying to teach, I could survive the encounter. I put together a plan, a hunting trip. Solo, into the heart of Denali, into the areas where most of the deaths had occurred. I'd go armed, but I wouldn't shoot to kill. I'd go prepared for cold, for long nights, for whatever the Tupilaq did to create those defensive circles, and I'd go with offerings. Tobacco, traditional items, symbols of respect. The things Thomas had told me the old hunters would bring. Acknowledgement that I understood the balance, that I respected what the Tupilaq represented. It was insane. It would probably get me killed. But 14 people were already dead, and more would die unless someone did something. On October 18th, I drove into Denali Backcountry, parked my truck near the Teclanica River not far from where Michael Patterson had been found. Hiked 5 miles into the wilderness, carrying enough gear for 3 days, found a clearing, set up camp, made a fire, and waited for the Tupilaq to find me. It came on the second night. I was sitting by my campfire, rifle leaning against a nearby tree, when I felt the temperature drop. Not gradually. Instantly, like someone had opened a door to a freezer. My breath started coming out in clouds. Frost appeared on the grass around me. The fire flickered, dimmed, the warmth being sucked away by something I couldn't see. I stood up, slowly, keeping my hands visible away from my weapon, showing I wasn't a threat. I know what you are, I said to the darkness. I know why you exist. I'm not here to hunt. I'm here to understand. The cold intensified. I could see my hands starting to go numb. Could feel the hypothermia beginning. That insidious process where your body starts shutting down from the inside out. And then I saw it. Not clearly. Never clearly. The Tupilaq moved like shadow, like distortion, like something that existed between visible and invisible. But I caught glimpses. A shape that was wrong, that was made from too many animals at once. Antlers that belonged to caribou but were positioned wrong. Claws that belonged to bear but were too long. Teeth that belonged to wolf but were too many. It was circling me, moving around the perimeter of my camp in a pattern I recognized from all those death scenes. The pattern that hunters had tried to defend against, the pattern that forced them into circles. I didn't form a circle, didn't reach for my rifle, just stood there, hands at my sides, letting the cold seep in. I'm not hunting, I said again. My teeth were starting to chatter. I came to learn, to understand what you're teaching. The Tupilaq stopped moving. For a moment I could see it fully, could see the horror of what it was. a thing that shouldn't exist, assembled from death, animated by something beyond nature, or maybe deeper than nature. A creature that was beautiful and terrible and wrong in all the right ways. And then it spoke, not with words, not with sound. But I heard it anyway, directly in my mind, in a voice that was wind and ice and the dying breath of 1,000 hunted animals. You hunt to protect. That is respect you seek to understand. That is respect. But those who come here hunt for pride, for trophies, for proof of dominance. That is not respect, that is imbalance. I teach them what they need to learn, that they are not predator, that they are prey, that death comes for all who forget the balance. Can't you teach them without killing them? I asked. Would they learn? Would they remember? Words fade. Stories are dismissed. Only death teaches the lesson that cannot be forgotten. I do not kill for pleasure. I kill to restore balance, to remind humans that they are part of nature, not separate from it. That is my purpose. That is why the land made me. I was shaking now, shaking from cold, from fear, from the impossibility of having a conversation with something that shouldn't exist. How do I protect people who don't understand? I asked. People who don't know about balance, who don't know they're hunting without respect? You teach them. You warn them. You show them what respect means. But some will not listen. Some will hunt as they have always hunted. And for those, I will continue teaching. That is my nature. That is my purpose. The cold began to recede. My circulation started returning. The Tupilaq was fading, dissolving back into shadow and distortion. Remember this, it said, and the voice was fainter now, farther away. Every hunter who dies in a circle has been given the greatest gift. They understand, in their final moments, what it means to be alive, what it means to be part of the cycle that is not cruelty. That is teaching. And the lesson continues until humans learn. And then it was gone. The temperature normalized. The fire brightened, and I was alone in the clearing, alive, understanding what I'd been told. The Tupilaq wasn't a monster. It was a teacher, a harsh teacher, a deadly teacher, but a teacher nonetheless. And its lessons would continue as long as people hunted without respect. I returned from my 3-day trip into Denali, changed. Not physically, no hypothermia, no injuries, still alive despite spending 2 nights in the territory where 14 hunters had died, but mentally, spiritually. I'd seen something that couldn't exist according to everything I'd been taught, and I'd learned a truth that I couldn't unlearn. The Tupilaq was real, and it would continue teaching its lessons until humans learned to hunt with respect. Director Morrison called me into his office on October 21st, the day after I got back. "Where were you?" he demanded. "You were on suspension. You were supposed to be home, resting. Instead, you disappeared into the backcountry for 3 days without telling anyone. Do you have any idea how many regulations you violated?" "I went to find the Tupilaq," I said simply. Morrison's face went red. "Kowalski, we talked about this. There is no supernatural creature. There is no Tupilaq. There's an environmental phenomenon we don't understand yet. But that's all it is. And you going into the woods chasing folklore is—" "I found it," I interrupted. "I saw it. I talked to it." Morrison stared at me. "You talked to it." "Yes, it's real. It's been real for hundreds of years. The Athabascan elders know about it. The indigenous communities have been trying to warn us about it for generations, but we don't listen because we think we know better." "Jim," Morrison said, and his voice had gone from angry to concerned. "I think you need to see someone. A psychologist. a counselor. The stress of this situation has clearly affected you more than I realized. I'm not crazy, I said. I'm the only one who's seeing clearly. That creature exists. It hunts hunters who hunt without respect, and it's going to keep killing people until we acknowledge what it is and why it's doing this. And how do you propose we do that? Morrison asked. Put up signs saying, "Warning, supernatural creature will kill you if you hunt incorrectly." Tell hunters they need to perform rituals before shooting. This is a government agency, Kowalski. We deal in facts, in evidence, in rational explanations. Then, here's a rational explanation, I said. Tell hunters that there's a predator in Denali that targets those who hunt for sport or trophies. Advise them to hunt only for food, to take only what they need, to respect the animals they kill. You don't have to call it a Tupilaq. Just warn them that hunting without respect in this region has consequences. Morrison was quiet for a moment. You want me to put out an advisory based on your conversation with a folklore creature? I want you to put out an advisory that might save lives, I said. The wording doesn't matter. The folklore doesn't matter. What matters is getting hunters to change their behavior, to hunt with respect instead of hunting for ego. I can't do that, Morrison said. I'd be laughed out of the department. The hunting industry would crucify us, and even if I wanted to, how would I justify it? What evidence do I present? The 14 bodies, I said. The pattern, the circles, the hypothermia. All the evidence is there, you just need to interpret it correctly. Morrison stood up, walked to his window, looked out at the Alaska wilderness. I'm transferring you, he said finally, effective immediately, to a position in Juneau, administrative work, no field duty. You need to get away from Denali, get some distance from this case. Maybe then you'll be able to see how irrational you've become. And the hunters, I asked, what happens to them? We'll continue investigating, Morrison said. We'll find a real explanation and we'll implement real safety measures. But I won't base policy on supernatural folklore no matter how much you believe in it. I was being exiled, pushed out of my territory, away from the problem, so I couldn't keep talking about things that made the department uncomfortable. When do I leave? I asked. End of the month, Morrison said. You have 2 weeks to wrap up your cases and transition your duties. 2 weeks, the hunting season would be over by then. The Tupilaq would retreat, return to whatever place it came from until the next September. And next year, hunters would die again. Because nothing would change. Because no one would listen. I spent my last 2 weeks in Denali, documenting everything. Wrote detailed reports about every death, every circle, every piece of evidence that pointed to the Tupilaq, compiled statements from Thomas Nicolai and other elders. Took photos of the tree carvings, the warnings that had been there for decades. Created a comprehensive file that I labeled Denali Hunting Deaths 1988 to 1994, Pattern Analysis and Indigenous Knowledge Integration. Submitted it to Fish and Game, sent copies to the state troopers, to Park Service, to anyone who might listen. The response was silence, or worse than silence, dismissal. Interesting cultural context, but not relevant to our investigation. Folklore should not be confused with evidence. Officer Kowalski's theories are not supported by scientific methodology. No one wanted to believe, no one wanted to acknowledge that there were things in Alaska older and stranger than our modern understanding could explain. On October 31st, my last day, I drove out to Denali one final time, hiked to the clearing where I'd encountered the Tupilaq. Left offerings at the base of a spruce tree, tobacco, carved wood, symbols of respect that Thomas had taught me, and I spoke to the air, to the wilderness, to whatever was listening. I tried, I said. I tried to make them understand. But they won't listen. They'll keep hunting without respect, and you'll keep teaching. The cycle will continue. I'm sorry I couldn't change it. The wind picked up colder than it should be, and for just a moment I felt that presence, that impossible, wrong but right thing that existed to restore balance, and I heard, faint as breath, that voice in my mind. You did what you could. That is respect. But the cycle continues until humans learn, perhaps in another 100 years, perhaps in 1,000. But I will teach until they listen. That is my purpose. Go in peace, hunter who understands. I left Denali, moved to Juneau, took the administrative position, spent the next 10 years pushing papers, analyzing data, staying as far from the wilderness as I could get. But I watched the reports, every September, every hunting season. And every year, a few hunters died in circles near Denali. Not as many as 1994. That had been an especially bad year. But always a few. Always the same pattern. Always unexplained hypothermia. In 2004, I retired from Fish and Game. Moved to Oregon. Tried to put Alaska behind me. But you don't forget something like the Tupilaq. You don't forget the lesson it taught you about being part of nature instead of separate from it. That was 30 years ago. I'm 64 now. Haven't been back to Alaska since I left in 2004. Haven't wanted to. Haven't needed to. But I still follow the news from Denali. Still check the reports every September. And the pattern continues. Every year, during hunting season, a few hunters die in circles. Always experienced hunters. Always unexplained hypothermia. Always rifles emptied at targets that leave no trace. The counts vary. Some years, it's just one. Some years, it's 5 or 6. Never as bad as 1994, but always steady. Always consistent. The official explanation has evolved over the decades. Now they call it Denali Hypothermia Syndrome, a poorly understood environmental phenomenon that causes rapid body temperature drop in certain geographical locations during autumn months. Hunters are warned to avoid specific areas, to hunt in groups, to carry extra cold weather gear, but they don't warn about respect. They don't warn about hunting for trophies versus hunting for food. They don't acknowledge what the indigenous communities have known for hundreds of years. And so the Tupilaq continues teaching. Last month I got an email from someone I didn't know. A young wildlife officer with Alaska Fish and Game stationed in Denali. Her name was Jennifer Martinez, and she'd found my old reports in the archives, Mr. Kowalski, she wrote. I'm investigating a series of hunter deaths near Denali National Park. The pattern is consistent with cases from the 1980s and 90s. I found your detailed reports from 1994, including your theories about the Tupilaq. Everyone in the department thinks those reports are outdated folklore, but the deaths are still happening. 30 years later, and we still don't have a real explanation. I need to know. Did you really encounter something out there? Or were the reports just your way of coping with cases you couldn't solve? I'm not asking to mock you. I'm asking because I think you might have been onto something. And I think if we keep ignoring what you tried to tell us, people will keep dying. If you're willing to talk, please call me. She included her phone number. I stared at that email for 3 days. Part of me wanted to delete it, to stay retired, to let someone else deal with the Tupilaq. But another part remembered being that young officer 30 years ago, trying to find answers that no one would acknowledge. I called her. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything, the circles, the cold, my encounter with the Tupilaq, the conversation with Thomas Nicolai, everything I'd learned about hunting. With respect, Jennifer listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I believe you, she finally said. Not because I want to believe in supernatural creatures, but because I've seen the same patterns you saw. I've felt that localized cold in the circles. I've seen the frost where there shouldn't be frost. And I've talked to elders who tell the same stories you heard 30 years ago. So what are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to try what you tried, she said. I'm going to document everything. I'm going to push for policy changes based on indigenous knowledge. I'm going to try to make people understand that hunting in Denali requires respect, whether or not they believe in the Tupilaq. They won't listen, I warned her. I tried for months. They transferred me rather than acknowledge the truth. Maybe, Jennifer said. But I have one advantage you didn't have. The internet. Social media, I can go public if the department won't listen. I can share the evidence, the patterns, the indigenous knowledge. Let people make their own decisions. That could end your career, I said. Probably, Jennifer agreed. But if it saves lives, if it makes even a few hunters think twice about why they're hunting and how they're hunting, wouldn't it be worth it? I thought about the 14 hunters who died in 1994. Thought about the hundreds who died in circles over the past century. Thought about Michael Patterson, about the Sullivans, about Jennifer Reeves scratching "It's teaching me" into the ground during her final hours. Yes, I said, it would be worth it. 2 weeks ago, Jennifer Martinez posted a video to YouTube, 37 minutes long, titled "The Denali Tupilaq, Why Hunters Die in Circles." In it, she laid out everything, the historical pattern, the indigenous knowledge, the warnings that have been ignored for generations, the evidence that something in Denali hunts those who hunt without respect. She interviewed Thomas Nicolai's great-grandson. She showed footage of the tree carvings. She presented data on the correlation between trophy hunting and circle deaths. She made the case carefully and thoroughly that hunters in Denali are being taught a lesson by something we don't fully understand. She didn't call it supernatural. She called it ecological correction mechanism and predator-prey relationship inversion, and other terms that made it sound scientific. But the message was clear. Hunt with respect or face consequences. The video went viral. 2 million views in the first week. Comments ranged from, "This is the best cryptid content I've ever seen," to, "This officer is brave for sharing indigenous knowledge," to, "Obvious hoax by anti-hunting activists." Alaska Fish and Game suspended Jennifer pending investigation, called her video unsubstantiated claims that damage department credibility. But hunters are talking about it, sharing it, debating it, and some of them, not all, but some, are changing how they approach hunting in Denali, taking only what they need, honoring the animals, showing respect. Last week, for the first time since I started tracking the data in 1988, September passed without a single hunter dying in a circle near Denali. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's just statistical variation. Maybe the Tupilaq is having a quiet year. Or maybe, just maybe, enough hunters are finally learning the lesson. Enough people are finally showing respect. Enough humans are finally acknowledging that they're part of nature, not separate from it. And maybe the Tupilaq, after teaching for hundreds of years, can finally rest. I don't know if Jennifer's video will have lasting impact. I don't know if hunters will continue to change their behavior. I don't know if the Tupilaq is really satisfied, or if it's just waiting for the next disrespectful hunter to wander into its territory. But I know this: the Tupilaq exists. It has always existed. It will continue to exist as long as there are hunters who need to learn what it means to be hunted. That's not a curse. That's not a monster. That's nature maintaining its balance in the only way some humans will understand. And 30 years after encountering it, after running from it, after trying to warn people about it, I finally understand what it was trying to teach me. We are not separate from nature. We are part of it. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted, teacher and student. The cycle continues, generation after generation. Until we learn to live in balance, the Tupilaq isn't our enemy. It's our mirror, showing us what we do to the animals we hunt, making us feel what they feel, teaching the lesson we refuse to learn any other way. And if we're smart, if we're wise, if we're respectful, we'll listen before it has to teach us again.